and was like, okay, I'm jumping in, full on. Within a week, my hands had stopped sweating profusely, which they'd always done. That, at school, I was sweaty boy. And then within about 3 or 4 weeks, my wedding ring was falling off. My granddad's ring was falling off. His signet ring, 2 rings that I wore. The mid-afternoon energy dips just started to level out. The brain fog disappeared. I started sleeping through the night. I used to get up 3 times in the night and pee. And weight just started falling off. And I wasn't particular, I wasn't thinking about weight necessarily as the main thing. Sure, I thought I do want to lose some, and certainly by the time I'm, hitting another decade, I know that I need to have lost some weight. So that was in the back of my mind, but everything else started taking over. I was like, wow, I feel really different. I guess within about 6 months, I just felt like a completely different human.
Welcome back to another episode of Cultivating Change, everyone. I'm your host, Alex Corey, and I'm very excited for today's guest. This is Coach Jake Mahal, based out of the UK. When Jake and I were in school together studying ancestral foundation and concepts, we noticed they were basically a slight variation of the same person. Shares a passion for food systems and for taking control of his nutrition, as I do. Has a pretty awesome permaculture setup in his new location. Completely different microclimate than me, obviously. I'm in Western North Carolina. This conversation goes all over the place, from our experience with clients, with the transition from more conventional, dogmatic sports performance, high carbohydrate, and more push mentality, just beating yourself into the ground. Jake and I had a similar experience as we were transitioning out of our peak youth, where the buffer of metabolism basically lets you get away with whatever you want, each finding our own way to more sustainable and longevity-based movement practices, focusing a little more on mobility. Jake recently got certified in MovNat, so I pick his brain quite a bit about that, as it's a fascinating human-based movement art form. I really hope you enjoy this conversation with Coach Jake Mahal. I don't think I've ever gotten your actually intro into health and what made you do the certification and the interest in the curriculum and actually pursuing impacting others through health in a more professional manner. So could you give us a little brief overview, well, brief as you want, about
Sure.
any problems you had to solve yourself, or how you landed on where you are now in your own health journey?
Yeah. So I kind of grown up in this kind of weird milieu of having a real unhealthy kind of home environment, with a super active backdrop and more health supportive environment at my grandparents' house, where I spent a lot of time. So my grandparents, well, my granddad, he was an elite athlete. He was a middle distance runner, represented Great Britain. Ran with Roger Bannister when Roger Bannister was breaking the 4 minute mile. So, that's the kind of level we're talking at. And he continued running until just a few years before he died, really very active. Grew up at home with my dad, and my basic meals were frozen lasagna from like ready meals. We had an Indian takeaway a couple of times a week, to the point where, like, he would call the Indian takeaway, they'd answer the phone, they'd hear the first couple of syllables and go, Mr. Mahal. And they'd say, yeah, it'll be there in half an hour. And then the other one was broken biscuits and custard. So kind of English style biscuits, cookies, and custard. So that was kind of, bad diet growing up, juxtaposed with this kind of active lifestyle at my grandparents, more salad, more vegetable, more meat, etc. But yeah, just struggled with weight from about the age 7, and never really lost that, despite pursuing sports science. So I did a sports science and theology degree at uni, very active during high school, and actually really fit. So doing things like the bleep test and things, I'd whoop the ass off everyone, but still carried a heckload of weight, still had mid-afternoon energy crashes, still struggled with brain fog. And it's really interesting because during my time at uni, what we were getting taught in lectures and what I was reading in some of the textbooks was so different to what I was reading in journal articles. And at that time, Tim Noakes is starting to kind of prod around in the journal articles, starting to see his name come up quite a lot, and he's talking a different narrative to what most people are talking. Like, this stuff's interesting. And scientifically, I think this stuff checks out as well. And so kind of became aware of the ancestral ideas, primal ideas. Mark Sisson had started blogging by that point, so starting to get a little bit of that through the airwaves as well. Internet connectivity wasn't great at university, but when I did get a bit of internet, I saw a bit of what Mark Sisson was doing. But essentially shelved all that to work as a sports scientist after graduation. Went with a mainstream approach. Lots and lots of exercise, lots and lots of carbohydrate, just the usual. And interestingly, I had a friend who I pointed in the direction of kind of going primal, going paleo, going ancestral, because he was really struggling with his weight the guy was obese. And he changed his lifestyle inside out. And he got lean, he got cut, he got energetic. And he got absolutely ridiculed by our friendship group at the time in our early 20s. And despite the results he was getting, he just didn't have a supportive atmosphere around him. But kudos to him, he stuck with it and went, I don't care what you guys think, I'm doing this and this is working for me. And I'm kind of sat there going, oh, I should probably do this too. But I just didn't have, I guess, the balls to kind of go, you know what, I'm going to, run the risk of ridicule with my friendship group as well. And it wasn't until I actually got married, and when I got married, was kind of talking about some of this stuff with my wife, and she's like, "Well, why don't you do that? That sounds great." So revisited all that material, went back to the journals, kind of discovered that Mark Sisson had got this whole thing going and quite this following. And I was like, "Okay, I'm jumping in," full on. Within a week, my hands had stopped sweating profusely, which they'd always done. That at school I was sweaty boy. And then within about 3 or 4 weeks, my wedding ring was falling off. My granddad's ring was falling off. His signet ring, 2 rings that I wore, to the point where I just couldn't wear them anymore because they weren't going to stay on, and I was at risk of losing them. And the mid-afternoon energy dips just started to level out. The brain fog disappeared. I started sleeping through the night. I used to get up 3 times in the night and pee. And weight just started falling off. And I wasn't I wasn't thinking about weight necessarily as the main thing. Sure, I thought I do want to lose some, and certainly by the time I'm, hitting another decade, I know that I need to have lost some weight. So that was in the back of my mind, but everything else started taking over. I was like, wow, I feel really different. And I guess within about 6 months, I just felt like a completely different human. Just really from edging back on the exercise, cutting out grains, the refined seed oils, and amping up everything else that was in my diet. My taste buds came alive. I started deriving more benefit from food in terms of my taste buds, but also just feeling good, didn't get bloated anymore. And yeah, I just felt all around great. And so when I discovered that there was a course to become accredited to essentially help other people do this, I thought, I really ought to do this. I've got a background in this stuff. It felt like upcycling my career. I'd already got a background in the sports science degree, that sort of thing, that way of thinking, but a sports psychology. And what was really interesting is that going through the master coaching certification, I'm like, I'm basically honing everything that I'd already been doing for years. And in so many different areas of my life, I've been coaching people without realizing that's what I'd been doing. They were just conversations. And then going through that certification, same time as you, and the other guys that we did it with, and honing that craft. I don't know if we ever shared a breakout room together.
No, I don't think we did.
Yeah, we had those kind of real intense practice sessions where you coach and then you get grilled by everyone else. And a great bunch of people to do it with, really, really kind, and the feedback's all constructive, but you really put on the spot. But actually I found, this is coming natural. People going, have you done this before? And I'm like, well, no, but yes at the same time. So it felt like a very natural fit. And I guess post certification, it was just like, right, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm going to give myself to, because I know the benefits I've had for me. I had, they encourage you during the school, and they're a brilliant school to certify with because they really push you business wise as well. And even to pass your modules, it's like you've got to do that business building stuff. So within that, I had my sort of practice clients, test clients, and they got brilliant results. And they're like, "Oh my goodness, this has changed my life." They told their friends, they came in, and so there was kind of a steady client stream off the back of certification. And whilst it's not been crazy groundbreaking. I'm not kind of doing that thing where, you get the kind of coaches out there who become business coaches after they're health coaches, and they're like, earn your six-figure salary. And, I'm not there, but I'm able to earn a living from it. And I absolutely love it.
I hope you're enjoying the podcast, everyone. I absolutely love talking to people about health and about what helped them on their journey to find optimal health. And if you're one of those people who finds yourself tinkering with your own health and loves inspiring others and pulling the best out of others on their framework, on their journey to their own optimal health, if you've ever thought about becoming a health coach and helping others making an impact in that area, I can't recommend Primal Health Coach Institute enough. They provide the literature, the framework, the business concepts, everything you need to actually build a successful health coaching business that pulls from ancestral nutrition, fitness, all of that genetically consistent strategies that a lot of the new and emerging literature is quickly pointing towards as being able to help people reveal their genetic blueprint and work towards optimizing their own health. If health coaching is something you're interested in, always check out the links in the podcast for booking a discovery call with Primal Health Coach Institute. It's been instrumental in helping me make a successful business impacting others through health.
Between jumping on calls within the day, coaching people, but still having the time to get out in the garden and provide most of my own food. It's a brilliant lifestyle, being able to set up a sustainable homestead that's getting there slowly. We've been here in our new place a year and a half, and we've done a fair amount of retrofitting already. It's just stuff that brings me so much life. And everything I'm doing, I believe is something that I can model to other people and help them on that journey with as well. And, that's a privilege, really. And, you get that. And I'm sure some of your listeners are going to get that too.
That was brilliant. Okay, so you went so many different directions. I'm going to pull you back to a big barrier that I heard you say, and that a lot of people have, where you're in university, your curriculum is telling you one thing, but you're paying attention to all of the journals, all of the raw data on the back end. So you mentioned that you even steered one of your friends towards a more ancestral type of diet, but you didn't do it yourself. Was there a fear, or what was the emotion or logic that was going on that prevented you from anecdotally doing it yourself, even though you were paying attention to the data? Was it just that curriculum is so brainwashing, for a word, that it just still is a good amount of fear, like you're going to give yourself heart disease if you do this? Or what was the feeling behind it?
Yeah, I think what you've just described there is accurate, that it is really brainwashing, and you're presented with data over and over again, to the point where you're like, well, this has got to be right. I've got professionals telling me this, people with PhD after their name, and these guys are professors. So I guess there wasn't a noticeable fear in me. It wasn't like, oh, am I going to do this? No, I think I might get heart disease. But it was just, I guess it was easy to dismiss the stuff that I was seeing that was contrary to the conventional approach. But thankfully, not to the point where I completely dismissed it, because I was like, I think the science checks out here. But I guess when your grades are dependent on you presenting the information that has been presented to you, it becomes very difficult to challenge, because you're literally writing about it and having to own that information yourself when you're made to write it, and when you know that you're not going to get a grade for thinking outside the conventional. I remember I went there once on I kind of submitted a draft presentation of combining creatine and beta alanine, because the data was quite early at that point on the two, and they just threw it out, and they were like, you're not going to get any marks for this. This is nonsense. Look back now and it's like, oh, lots of people are stacking those two things together. But because it wasn't the convention at the time, they weren't going to grade it well. And I think to have done anything as ancestral would have been far too left field for them within, the institution.
Let's give people, because we're in a bubble, right, of ancestral nutrition and primal stuff. Can you give people a little bit of context as to some of the stuff that you were reading at the time? What was the convention that you were being taught, and then what was the data that you were seeing otherwise? Just like a couple examples of big, sweeping, broad stroke stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, the big one, I think was carb loading. That's still common with some athletes. That's starting to swing, as well now. That we're probably a decade into swinging away from that, in a number of circles, even in the mainstream. But yeah, that was a big thing back then. If you're an endurance athlete, you have absolutely got to carb load because that's your body's preferred energy. And everybody gets to that 20-mile point in a marathon and they start falling apart because they're having to dig into body fat, and accessing body fat's really difficult. Yes, it is if you're not, metabolically efficient and you can't, you've trained your body to not access body fat well. And I guess this was the pushback from someone like Tim Noakes. That was the name that I remember being aware of at that time. And I remember Tim Noakes saying, well, we didn't evolve that way. We must have used different methods of accessing energy. Our ancestors would have had to have been on the go a long time. And I guess Sisson was sort of saying the same stuff back then as well. But I don't remember seeing, his name pop up as much. I guess within the academic world, Tim Noakes had been doing a lot more work for a lot longer, particularly on the endurance stuff. And, Mark's got that lived experience, but he wasn't coming from the academic standpoint. So I guess that was the big thing was, do we really need that amount of carbohydrate? And then I guess from there, that filtered down into, over the coming years, looking back onto grains in particular. But, broad stroke was just the heavy carb approach.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I was drilled in with that information in high school because I did cross country in middle school and high school, just destroyed my knees because I was taught to run incorrectly. Well, I should say I wasn't, they didn't teach how to run. They assumed you knew how to run, but if you grow up in sort of newish sneakers or running shoes with massive differences in the heel and the toe on pavement, it's going to be a bad time regardless. So that was one thing. But every night before a race, and we were only doing 5Ks. So this was, 3.1 whatever miles. It wasn't a long time, but it's long enough for high school. And we would just have pasta dinners over at my cross country coach's house, and I felt so awful afterwards. I mean, just balls of spaghetti. And I basically grew up on spaghetti, so it was just an enormous amount of pleasure. But it was brutal, and you don't obviously exhaust your glycogen stores on a 5K, so it doesn't really matter that much. You could just do nothing to prepare and you'd be fine. But I had a very, very inspirational cross country coach, and she still did marathons, but she did the traditional way. She just kind of ran her body into the ground, trained every day, did the Boston Marathon because I grew up in New Hampshire, and she was great, but it was just a very high inflammatory, like everyone was in so much physical pain just after eating and then after the race. And you're a kid, so you rebound quickly. You don't notice the metabolic damage. But if you try to do that whenever you don't have that massive buffer of just being in your teens, you start to notice the inflammation. Just things don't go away if you're not actively recovering or loading yourself up with anti-inflammatories. So similar story. Anything else that comes to mind besides carb loading for the data difference you were encountering?
Yeah, I think and you just kind of alluded to it there, is that training load really of just push, 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 push. You want to be overreaching constantly, but, not hitting overtraining. So there was an awareness that there was a limit to where our bodies could go, but we wanted to hang out on that limit all the time because it was all about, that cranking up the performance constantly. Can you flip your training round so that you're doing, weight session, cardio session, and then probably some mobility work all in one day. And I remember I was getting up to do a run to the pool. I would do a swim, get back, and that was before lectures in the morning. So before 9 a.m., I crammed all that in. 3 o'clock, I was in the gym because that's when it opened. And then in the evening, I was trying to find whatever sport I could do. I was playing for the rugby team, but I'd also train with the football team, the hockey team, badminton team. I would just be doing whatever. And again, that's kind of I was in the buffer of my teens, so I could get away with it. That's the only way I did get away with it, and I tried to continue doing that in my 20s, and that's when things really started falling apart.
Yeah, that's what I hear from quite a few people. My last podcast was a in his 20s gentleman, Lucas Hale. He did Olympic weightlifting, strongman, and he just beat his body to crap. And you can do it in your early 20s. That's the time to do it because you are just regenerating so quickly. Your hormones almost don't care what you do. But yeah, you hit, it seems to be like a 25 for guys, seems to be the point where you're just like, ooh, I might need to switch this up because the pain and the inflammation just doesn't go away as quickly. And you need to start paying attention to what you do in your body a little bit. And that's usually where people find the start of their health journey with, how do I regenerate? Maybe treat my body a little better. What did you do? When did you start your 6-month journey? That's a real fast transformation. What did you feel, or what did you do specifically during your little 6-month weight loss, energy, all of that you described earlier? Would you actually change?
So the big one was a real complete elimination of grains, refined seed oils, to a degree, sugar, not crazily, but I probably wasn't having that much refined sugar anyway, and still don't. But I'm really not afraid of sugar. Now I know I've got the metabolic flexibility to handle it, and I'll spike and I'll come back down, and that's fine. But it was those two things really, and I guess from reading the Primal Blueprint inside out, I was like, okay, these are the things I really need to work on. And then, I mean, the hard one was the exercise piece. It really was kind of hanging back. I was an endorphin junkie. And literally, so when I first got married, my wife would say if I hadn't trained for a couple of days and I was getting a bit cranky, she was like, you need to go into the garden. And I would go out and probably do a heavy leg session. Even if I'd already done one in the week, I'd go out and do another heavy leg session because that's where I felt, like most buzzy off the back of it. So having to pull those back in and do a lot more long, slow endurance, recognizing that I did not have an aerobic base. Every time I went out for a run, I was just relying on my anaerobic system the whole time. I was pushing and pushing and pushing and allowing the endorphins to carry me through. And because I'd built a heck load of mental resilience over the years, so I could get away with doing that. I could push it until I literally got home and fell down and everything cramped. And I'd be like, celebrating that. So having to pull back from that was quite difficult initially. But basically flipping that mental toughness and going, no, I need to do this. I'm going to push through. I'm going to give this my all, even though it feels like I'm not giving it my all. It was a real kind of mental game that I had to play with myself to get there. So that was a big, big change for me. Slowing the pace of life down as well. I was a big believer that I could just gun it all day, every day, and productivity meant being glued to the task. And learning actually that's actually quite inefficient. Learning to start taking breaks, particularly if I was working at a screen, looking into the distance, getting regular movement in. Movement snacks became a big thing, and micro
workouts. Oh yeah, love myself some micro workouts. Just made a post about it.
Yeah. That was a real lifesaver actually, because that would be one where when I was starting to feel that itch, where previously I'd have gone out and it would have been a heavy leg session, I could actually just switch it up for some crawls or some swings, some pull-ups, whatever. And that would just give me a little mental boost, little break from the task, get back to it, feel fresh. At the same time, I was reading some productivity books and they were suggesting, Pomodoro timers, that sort of thing. I'm like, this fits really well. So started doing that. And from that started to better regulate. I noticed I used to get aural migraines where I wouldn't necessarily have a headache, but my vision wouldn't quite be right and I'd feel a bit off, a little bit dizzy. They completely cleared as well. And I think that was a combination of all those things, backing off on the exercise, not working, quite so hard, but working smart. And, there's the other stuff as well, like making sure I'm getting appropriate sunlight. That's never been something I've particularly struggled with. I've always, been a bit of a sun worshiper. And, now rather than just slopping on the sun cream and, going out and going, well, I'll get as much as I can. It's kind of getting it without the sun cream and then finding shade and just keeping that appropriate. And I found that my circadian rhythm just came into alignment as well. So that wasn't really something I had to work on. I just started sleeping better through the night. And by the time it got to 10 o'clock, I was ready for bed. I was feeling tired. I wasn't having the mid-afternoon energy dip. I wasn't slumping. But I was, ready for bed at the right time. Woke up feeling refreshed and ready to go again the next day. So yeah, it was about 6 months, that initial period. And I think I probably had a 3-year lag after that, until I really noticed the next big breakthrough, which I think 3 years was probably the point where I would say I was back to optimized, in terms of really understanding my body inside out, knowing when I could change things up, getting to the point where I thought, okay, I've been doing this for a time now, and my body's ready for something different. I need to hit it with slightly higher carbohydrate amount, for instance, for a season before lowering it again. And it took me a little longer to get down into the minutia, but that initial 6 months was the big breakthroughs.
What were you doing for carbohydrate amount during that 6-month time frame? What do you think you're at? Were you ever a big measurer and tracker, or did you just go with what felt good? And
yeah, to begin with, I didn't measure or track at all. I literally got rid of the grains and relied on the fact that would be taking me down to an appropriate amount. And the weight loss and the feeling good suggests that was somewhere about in the right zone. Since then, I periodically track. I'm not a big tracker. I'm not an advocate for my clients tracking. Some do because they like it. Fair enough. Most don't, and it's a pain in the backside to do all the time. But occasionally doing a 3-day, just check in with yourself, make sure you're keeping yourself honest. That can be helpful.
Yeah, exactly. I hate tracking. It just takes, I already don't care about food. I don't have I've never cared so much about taste or even really texture. I can eat basically the same thing every day and be perfectly fine with it. I derive my pleasure from so many other things. Food is not my main source of pleasure, but tracking it makes it even less appealing. If I didn't have to eat, I wouldn't. I just don't. It's not a huge facet of my life, but I also just eat very satiating foods, so I never have any real things. There's a lot of fish in there, there's a lot of steak, things that I'm just no, I'm just happy all the time. I don't really care. A lot of berries. But yeah, tracking can be one of the biggest barriers for people. I make people do it for a week just because that's a baseline, and then maybe we'll do it again just to make sure that the people aren't sneaking in. Weight loss community is a little weird, but a lot of liquid calories. I think who was the guy who wrote Genius Foods? Anyways, he's big on social media, but it's liquid calories that do people in a lot of the time. So it's sodas or a lot of the highly processed, even juices. There's a lot of, blood sugar spiking, insulin disrupting, and just a lot of calories in liquids. And if people are if they're going through the effort of counting calories, that might be 250 to 500 calories in a drink. And if you can replace that, and that's the opposite with weight gain, which is actually my current endeavor. And I work with a lot of skinny guys, and it's just drink your calories if you want to go the other way. If you need help if you're eating such satiating foods as ancestral foods, just nutrient dense, where you're just not actually hungry all the time, but you still need an small excess, 200 to 400 extra calories, coconut milk and just protein and fruit in drinks are your best friend, just to shove calories down, because it just doesn't disrupt the hunger signals. But eliminating grains is a massive one. That's usually when people ask, can I just do something simple just to play with and see how I feel? Yeah, if you can get rid of refined seed oils, like you mentioned, and grains, it's a huge oxidative load off. Refined seed oils it's hard to describe to people what they're doing inside of your body. It's not just the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, because that gets into the weeds of science and most people don't care that much. That's an optimization thing. It's more so just to rusting. Like most of them are rancid. They're oxidized. An oxidation just means like not in its whole form. Like already, if you think about rust, that's oxidation. And if you want to think about it, like cutting an apple open, cutting an avocado open, and let it just sit out, and it looks like it's rusting or aging. So that's what the seed oil is doing. They're mostly byproducts of industry. Like we are not supposed to eat those things. They're just ways for grape manufacturers, vineyards, they're ways for industries that are selling something else to dispose and sell a waste product. Most of the time, you can definitely do, like, have you ever grown your own sunflowers and done sunflower seed oil?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? It's like, can you grow this in your garden?
Right. Yeah. How much effort would this take to have it in its whole form? And would you be willing to do it? And most of the time it's no. I mean, but that's for all the good ones too. I mean, that's why saturated fat's usually easiest, because people would have had access to saturated fat because it stores so long without oxidation. But the seed oils are, if you have to describe the process of getting that into a bottle to someone and all of the chemical processing, most people are like, okay, fine, I get it.
Yeah, you start talking about the bleaching and
Yeah.
deodorization, and people, you can see the whites in people's eyes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's enough usually. We're like, okay, fine, I get it. But yeah, those are two huge ones. Do you do a pantry purge with your coaching still?
Yeah, I do. Especially when I do like a 21-day reset.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then that's one at the start, because I guess when you're doing one-on-one coaching, you're going at the client's pace. You've got 8, 12 weeks, or potentially even longer, depending on how they come to you and the way they want to spin it. In which case you may go slightly more gently. With the 21-day thing, it's like, right, we're just going straight in there. I'm going to pretty much tell you what to do. Whether you follow through or not, that's up to you. But together, I always run that in a group format, pretty much. So it's kind of like, okay, we're all going to try this together. Stick it in a box, put it in your garage, put it in the shed, out of sight, out of mind. Let's just get it out of the way, and then we'll restock with some more supportive foods. Odds are you've probably got supportive foods in your house anyway. Most people who end up working with me have already tried some stuff previously, so that they're going to have some fruit and veg around. They're going to have some good meat around. But yeah, just getting those things out of the way normally is the biggest thing. I think with food, it's the subtraction actually that really helps, rather than the potential additions. And as you start getting to the minutiae, you start to turn the screw. You want to put those additions in there, but to begin with, it's definitely getting those two things out of the way that just revolutionizes people. I've got a kind of year-round community group,
Nice.
and they were referring back to their or some of the people on the call yesterday were referring back to their reset, and they're like, I couldn't believe how different I felt in the first week of just having got those out of my life. And yeah, I'm still seeing these improvements, but that first week of getting rid of those was absolute game changer.
Do you find any real sustainable change that can happen without changing your environment? Have you found that ever?
No. Blunt answer. Certainly wasn't true for me. It was that environmental change that was the trigger, and the support. And if you don't get those things out the way, they're going to be staring at you. And out of sight, out of mind, or insight in mind, I think holds true all the time. You've got to craft your environment. I think as a species, that's one of the places that we are so unique, is we have such a broad-ranging top-down effect on our environment, which we can spin to our advantage, or if we're not mindful of it, we can run away with the profit motive, or the looking good motive, or whatever it is, to the point where our environment ends up kind of being our downfall.
Yeah, well said. So nutrition, you would still say, would be the biggest mover for most people?
I think so. The way I always describe it is, because we're products of our environment, and because our genes are being turned on and off by our environment, food is the environment that we're taking and putting inside ourselves.
Right.
It's always going to have the most visceral effect, because it's literally that change from inside out. You are what you eat. As trite and as overused that saying is, it's so true.
Yeah, it's information, right? So there's information through media, there's information through what you put in your body and what you put in your body willingly or knowingly or unknowingly. So there's environmental toxins and all that. So nutrition is the big one. What did you notice in your journey to sort of be the cascading effects? Like, it sounds like you started with nutrition and then movement was there already. Were there any other sort of epigenetic or lifestyle things that you did to optimize after those broad sweeping ones? So movement, nutrition are usually the big ones. And then what did you play with down the road to sort of optimize, like lighting or anything like that?
Yeah, so lighting was definitely kind of a probably third or fourth thing really was changing the lights in the house, making sure that they had options. So I've never been big into glasses and having them on my face. I know that you've got a pair on right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I got a ring light on in front of me. That's the only reason. It's just a lot of white light at me right now.
Yeah. So yeah, we switched up the lights in the house so that we used to have LED ones that would kind of change at the right time of day. So the sun would go down, they would go down as well, become more orange. We now have similar ones, but ones you can kind of override, and just with the way that you use the switch, you can flick them on and off a couple of times, and they'll change their frequency and go down to sort of 1,200 Kelvin rather than being up near 3,000.
Yeah.
And so the standard lights that come on in the lounge, those ones behind me, are sort of like a real orange. Whatever time of day or night you put those on, they're more firelight glow.
Yeah.
Then you can also put some spots on as well. So there are lots of options for low light. Blocking everything out in the bedroom, big one. We've become super light sensitive. Like the more the more we've optimized light, the more we've had to optimize light. So we recently had all our windows retrofitted. So now there are bits of the inside of our walls hanging off, and then you're replastering and things. So it means we haven't got a blind. So we've been sticking things to the windows to try and make sure all of the cracks of light are out. And then we have the kind of dichotomy of, do we have a window open to get fresh air in, or do we save the light? And we have one night where it's really stuffy and we're like, oh, we're going to have to open a window, and then it's too light, and it's like, oh, we'll go back to closing the window. We just need to get the plaster in is the real solution, so we get the blinds back up. So light was a big one. I'm just trying to think what else.
Let me go over that real briefly for people who have no idea what we're talking about. So this is circadian rhythm optimization and management, and it's a big part of basically sleep hygiene, but mostly just hormone leveling. So our body is very photosensitive, and what we're going over is your body is communicating with your environment all the time, right? So at the full sun part of the day, so midday is when you get the most blue light naturally. So we're just trying to mimic whatever the sun is emitting. So probably around late afternoons when the blue light, maybe 3 or 4 is when the blue light starts to fade, and then transitions into more yellow, orange, and then red. So I have like white LEDs on me right now, but like you, I have a lamp that I just put orange and yellow lights in. And I won't be I used to be way more religious about it. Like I would step down yellow, orange, red, but now, and that's just mimicking firelight, campfire light. So the blue disappears from the sun and you get more softer hues like during a sunset. So next to my bed, I have like a campfire light, like it's pretty dim red light. So there's almost no actual, like, it doesn't do anything my hormones, just so I can see softly. But a lot of people notice dramatic differences in sleep if they just get rid of the white and blue light from especially their bedroom. LEDs too, like the study that kind of just made me chuckle, I think it was in the curriculum, was just I'll find this at some point, but they flashed an LED on the back of someone's knee in the middle of the night, and they had brainwave scanners hooked up to them, and the brain would light up just with like a 30-second, once every 30 seconds, a pulse of an LED on the back of your knee would light your brain up. So your skin even is very photosensitive. So even if it's not coming in your eyes, like your body is noticing it. So any of that stuff can disrupt that deep sleep that you really feel restored for. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what all of the ancestral nerds do, is just change all the lighting. Most people know blue light's bad for, your phone has a blue light filter, but it does really help me to have the orange, the yellow, the softer, dimmer light to step down into sleep at night. It's a nice transition instead of just like white light and then nothing.
Yeah, I mean that's so much more natural, isn't it? Our body's expecting that kind of stepped response as the sun goes
Yep.
down, and maybe we have that campfire light, and serotonin starts up regulating its conversion to melatonin, and
Yep.
it's just that natural drift into sleep. So, yeah, I think it's really helpful to do that.
Yeah, agreed. So you are also would you call yourself a farmer or a gardener?
A gardener, yeah, definitely
Okay.
a gardener.
When did
Um,
that start? How'd you get into that's almost more fascinating for me as how people get into growing their own food and did you think of it whenever you started as taking control of your nutrition, or was it just like an enjoyable hobby?
I think it actually started as a sort of care for the planet sort of thing.
Okay.
Of these are some crazy food miles that we've got for our food, and kind of looking at the labels and thinking, hang on a minute, it's midsummer here in the UK. Why do we have tomatoes from Africa?
Right.
This is ridiculous.
Mhm.
And then so we started buying local, we started buying organic, we started buying regenerative, and then it was like, well, the next phase from that surely is to reduce the food miles to food meters. And this, it really, I think, I'm trying to figure out the timeline here. I think we started that journey a little bit before
Mhm.
I started my certification with Primal, but there was a point of crossover as well where I'm studying permaculture,
Mhm.
uh, and then started, really digging deep into the research around ancestral lifestyle ahead of doing the certification. But at that time, becoming fascinated by the microbiome,
Mhm.
kind of going, oh my goodness, what is going on in the soil here? This is a living community of organisms, and then the gut microbiome, this is a living community of organisms, and it's not incidental that they're both living communities, and one is meant to inform the other. We're meant to be taking in the information from the soil, and that's meant to be going into our stomach. And we're seeing the research now on the information transfer between the microbiome and the mitochondria, the bacterial cell that's inside our cells, producing our energy for us. And I think that science is going to blow up over the next couple of years. So that's one to keep our eyes on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I started to recognize that soil health was really linked to human health as well as planetary health. And so I started geeking out on that. And soil science is one of those things that's kind of compared to paint drying as being a really boring science. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is the opposite. This stuff's like amazing. And I think I've always had a real interest in anthropology. What really makes us human, evolutionarily, sociologically, theologically, politically. And in my degree, I ended up kind of looking at that.
Mhm.
What does make us human? That was my dissertation, really. Um, and so looking at this kind of, looking at what's going on in the soil and our microbiome, and how that leads to our health and planetary health, that was like really scratching my itch intellectually. But from there, we start growing our own food. There's something magical about planting a seed and it becoming, something that you nurture and watch, and then you get to eat it in the end. And that whole slow food movement, I think that mindfulness piece around it was just great.
Mhm.
And I really noticed that the benefits of mental health, benefits of gardening, of being out in nature,
Oh yeah.
green, the fresh air, the bird song, grounding. That was something that I discovered kind of accidentally, really. I thought, I just feel good through doing this. And I was at a friend's farm, and they were talking about lavender bathing. And I looked into lavender bathing, discovered grounding, and went and read the journal articles on that, and was like, this stuff really checks out. And again, it was just one of those things where things just fell into place. It was like,
Mhm.
this makes sense. Of course, it makes sense. This is how we've evolved to being in contact with the earth, and our electron discharge. So yeah, I started experiencing, I guess, a coalescence of lots of geeky things, but in a very just normal everyday being out in the garden. Of this hits so many of those points. You find yourself in ancestral resting poses when you're out in the garden.
Yeah, you do.
You're in a deep squat, you're in a side bent sit, you crawl from plant to plant. So you're getting that low level movement all day, every day. You're getting sunlight, you're getting nature exposure, you're eating great food, you're
Mhm.
rehabbing the microbiome. Um, and yeah, just derived a heck load of enjoyment from there, and found that we saved a heck load of money as well,
Yeah.
as a family. So um, the first year we started rehabbing this plot. So this was where my grandparents used to live, and we were caring for my grandma during her decline.
Mm.
So we started using this place. In the first year, we spent £744 and got £1,000 worth of organic produce. Last year, we spent, I think, £122 and got £5,000 worth of organic produce. This year, we've put a bit more in because we've bought a few more trees. We are extending the greenhouse setup. We built a workshop. So we're probably a few £1,000s worth of investment this year in the garden. But even just as a kind of carryover from last year, I'm expecting to probably hit £7,000 or £8,000 worth of organic produce, a lot of which we haven't even planted this year. It's just self-seeded because we didn't get around to, clearing things up properly at the end of last year. And some people would come around and just go, oh man, some of this, the food forest at the moment is a mess because there are the trees that are quite young and around it are just what they would consider weeds, but
Right.
nearly all of them are edible. And if they're not, they're performing a function within the system and helping grow some of the edibles. So back end of this season, it's going to need a little bit of care and maintenance. But actually, all of that work, I was raking a little bit today, and I'm thinking, oh man, this is just a great workout.
It is. Raking is intense. It's a whole bunch of stabilization, core work, your shoulders, like all the little slow twitch just go. I'm very sore after raking because I rarely do something like that. And you're only sore if you do something that your body is not used to. So there's a bunch of great exercises that are like mulching or just any of those, twisting. Obviously, like do a little warm up before you do that because you can tweak your back. But anything in the garden is a great workout.
Yeah, and I think you've got everything there because you've got those big lifts that tend to happen in winter where you're moving soil around, and I choose not to use a wheelbarrow for that sort of thing. I put it in a gorilla bucket and get it up on my shoulder, clean it up there, and take a wander. And it takes a bit longer. People go, "This is mad," and I'm like, "Yeah, this is a stacked activity, and time. This saves me time because I don't have a gym membership. I don't need to work out at some point. I'm getting all that out there."
Yeah, it's CrossFit. I mean, it's the exact same thing as CrossFit. I think last year I made a couple of videos. If you just either run with a wheelbarrow full up a hill or use a bucket and just like do a little clean and press, put it up on your shoulder, there's no difference. And you are always off kilter. Nothing is centered, right? So you're always getting a great core workout. The only thing that I would say is I have hurt my lower back so many times because you just don't think about it being a workout. And if you start lifting some heavy, like a heavy bucket, definitely do a little bit of a warm up before if you're going to treat it like a workout so you don't tweak your lower back like me.
Yeah. I think going out and starting with like a gentle bit of pruning or something like that, just so you're getting moving before you get onto the heavy lifting, that works really well.
Yeah, agreed. Do you find that, so you wouldn't have noticed any tremendous difference because you've been growing your food for so long, you wouldn't have seen such a dramatic improvement whenever you started growing your food because you didn't coincide the growing of your own food with any of the other health changes, correct?
I mean, I think there probably was a point of crossover, so it would be difficult to kind of say it was growing our own food that made that change. I think it wouldn't be a clean test. It wasn't like I was already living ancestrally and then made that switch. But I think intuitively, I know that the two have gone together really well, and I totally wouldn't be surprised. If we could analyze it somehow to find a massive change, particularly in things like the microbiome. I mean, the diversity of plant matter that I eat now is insane. I showed my clients last week. I made a frittata that had about 35 different vegetables in from the garden, and a lot of those were weeds and flower heads that people wouldn't normally consider eating. And just going, because I think I don't know if you come across Tim Spector, British guy.
Yes.
Yeah. And he's kind of made some headlines over here saying we need to have 30 different plants a week. That's what we should be aiming for. And I'm like, heck, you can get that in a meal. You can get that diversity easily, because I think a lot of people, they're still on that 5 fruit and veg thing, and that's the 5 or maybe 10 that they're used to. But it's so easy to go really diverse. especially when you're growing your own, because you're not limited by what the supermarkets
Right.
can sell. You can go for heritage varieties. You can go for stuff that normally wouldn't grow here. If you can create your own little microclimate, if you know how to do that, you've got a good in my hemisphere, and I think your hemisphere. You've got a south-facing wall. You can create a little microclimate and grow some interesting tropical things in there. And just get that diversity.
So I don't know the UK food system at all. We have US has a 3-day just-in-time food system where you're 3 days away from nothing being the supermarket. What do you know the UK food system in depth at all? Like where did most of your stuff come from? Is there a good amount of local production? Like what did you find whenever you started trying to buy local and all that?
Yeah, buying local is actually pretty easy. So it is more difficult in supermarkets, but there is a good amount of veg box services around. We're right in the middle of the country here in Stafford, so we're kind of surrounded by agriculture, not too far out of the town. So it's very easy here to get some local stuff. People buying in the supermarkets really started to struggle after Brexit. When there were there's ambiguity around how things were meant to be coming into the country and how things were documented, and there were lorries just backed up. We had pictures on the news of lorries just at the ports in France, couldn't get across to the UK, coinciding with COVID as well, and also coinciding with a lot of people leaving the country who felt insecure here, understandably, because racism was on the up, and a lot of those workers from Eastern Europe would have been working in the fruit industry, the vegetable industry, doing picking. There was talk of things just going to rot on the plant, and then people were freaking out because they couldn't get it in their supermarkets. People who were buying local veg boxes were absolutely fine,
right?
So it's totally doable here. I think if everyone were to do it, we might start to struggle. We're pretty dense compared to the US here. And it would take quite a while for everyone to catch up to more sensible food production systems, regenerative agriculture and stacked systems like permaculture, food forests, etc. We're so used to that monocrop model, which is so inefficient. Yeah, it drives you a quick crop of one thing if you absolutely nail the soil and everything that's living in there and don't have any ambiguity. So I think we would really struggle if we were to have a repeat of what we had during the Brexit thing. So I think that shows that we're dependent on particularly Europe around us, and lots of things coming in from Eastern Europe, Romania, Albania, places like that are now sort of being referred to as the breadbasket of Europe. And that's an unfortunate term because it's not just grain. Sure, there's a heckload of grain like there is everywhere, but also there's a lot of other produce that comes in from there.
It's just a fertile soil, I'm assuming, much like the Midwest of the US, which is probably the least fertile soil at this point because we've exhausted it so much. But yeah, I gotcha.
Yeah, exactly the same. And what's really interesting about the UK is that we can get away with a heck of a lot here. We have an extremely favorable climate given where we are. We benefit hugely from the buffering of the sea. We've got the Gulf Stream coming up from Central America. So that buffers our temperatures hugely. It's very warm here compared to what it should be. And we get away with abusing the soil in a way that, when we've taken our farming practices around the world, when we decided it would be a great idea to invade everywhere and say, hey, farm like us, has caused, massive collapse. So, it's very, very forgiving here. You can regenerate quickly. So if we were to change our agricultural practices, we'd probably do very well. Pretty quickly on changing to more sensible regenerative agriculture. And it's happening on the fringe, I guess, like it is in the States. There are some states that are moving forward with, banning glyphosate, for instance, and looking at giving farmers subsidies for looking after the soil. And that in theory is happening here, but the right things aren't in place to aid that transition. There's not a stopgap for farmers making that transition. So those policies need thinking through a little bit more, or farmers are going to have to come up with the sort of sideline businesses to give them that stop as they change, which some are, but it's a big risk to take. There are some organizations that are doing a good job of helping people transition and providing the right markets for them as they transition as well. So most of the meat we buy in our house is fully regenerative. Some of it is organic that's not fully regenerative yet because the farmers aren't getting there. And the company we buy through are suggesting that we buy from those making a transition as well, because it's going to help them become regenerative. And in the long term, that's going to benefit everyone.
Right.
Both we're going to have a greater variety of what we can buy, and the farmers are more incentivized to work that way and are giving a marketable product in the meantime.
I got a slightly controversial, but more I just want to pick your brain. Have you been following carnivore movement at all?
Yeah. It crops up a lot, I think,
Yep.
in our schools.
Well, a lot of it's AIP, so autoimmune protocol. Basically, if your immune system's just going haywire from usually too many grains, but too many large molecules slipping through small intestine, just intestinal permeability, and your immune system going bananas because nothing other than like broken down glucose, amino acids, and lipids are supposed to get through that. Carnivore, I think, has hit a nerve with the AIP crowd just because it's almost a complete elimination diet. But the argument in it, I mean, it has fantastic results to speak with. So that's why it pisses people off so much, because it's the polar opposite of everything that the conventional model has taught. And people are losing stupid amounts of weight and just energy skyrocketing once they become fat adapted. But the argument is about the microbiome, which is why I thought about it. It's, yeah, but don't you need fiber and short chain fatty acids and other, direct bacteria and or the prebiotics to feed them to have diversity? And that's the big question, since the microbiome research is still very, very new. So what's your opinion on, I have my own, but I'll do it after yours. What do you think about that diet and microbiome diversity, or just gut health?
So I think, at the outset, just kind of in agreement with you there, that it does have really good results. It totally has a place within the AIP
Yeah.
sort of scenario. I don't think you can argue with the results, really.
Right.
People make back from the brink of all sorts of health disasters and syndromes, etc. For me, I think the crunch comes when you're playing the long game,
Mm-hmm.
which is how long can you sustain that for without seeing some sort of inverse effect. And
Yeah.
I think any extreme sort of diet like that, I'd want to see some longer term data, and we don't have it yet because it's a fairly new
Yeah, it's
movement.
new. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd be interested to see how it works in the long term. I know some people have been carnivore and have eventually had to wean themselves back onto having some vegetable or fruit products,
Yeah.
usually entering with berries, maybe a little bit
Yeah.
of honey,
Yeah.
um, and then slowly rehabbing their microbiome. I guess like people who do sort of a FODMAP sort
Right.
of diet, they eliminate all of those, but after a while, they start to feel sluggish and feel like they're needing some of those kind of higher FODMAP foods in their diet again. And once they get their stress levels under control, which often is the thing that gets missed out, I think, on
Right.
low FODMAP thing, is that gentle reintroduction, strategic reintroduction, allowing the microbiome to adapt, because ultimately it's not us doing the digestion, it's the
Right.
microbes. Hence why I think probably going carnivore is so successful for many people in the short term, because they've completely wrecked their microbiome
Right.
probably, and are needing to kind of really simplify. And I think that's what it is. It's simplification.
Right.
Um,
This is the
and
ultimate
then,
elimination diet. Yeah.
yeah. I think that's a good way of phrasing it. And then slowly building back up, probably like the same of any elimination diet. That would be my hunch. I think we've got early
Yeah.
indications of that from people who've been through it and are coming out the other side of it now. And I wouldn't be surprised if we trend that way. My other big concern with it is if loads of people were to do it, it really would not be sustainable. The current way we're providing meat for ourselves isn't sustainable, and unless we massively change that, we're not going to be able to feed everyone on a methodology even close to that, or even close to what most people are doing right now.
Right. Right. But some people are usually just thinking about their specific health, in which case you don't care if it's doable at scale. But yeah, I agree with you. If everyone, maybe though, I mean, you just don't eat a lot if you're on that diet, maybe twice a day. And it's
Mm.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. We do have a lot of like 30-year anecdotes before the diet was a thing. People are like, I've been doing this for like 30 years and everything's great. But some people have very different metabolisms and are great at oxidizing fat. Some people are a little slower at it. And yeah, stress is a huge player. Like, you just don't metabolize fat as well if your cortisol is just jacked up all of the time. But yeah, the performance around it, very interesting too. There's a number of doctors that are Anthony Chaffee, Saladino was the one that started it, right? Him and Sean Baker, all of these guys are not overweight people. So that's the question is, Paul Saladino found he did carnivore-ish after he basically, wrote the book on carnivore, and then it was like, maybe add a little more autumnal. So not a lot. He is the antioxidant guy who blew my view of antioxidants apart. He's like, no. These are pro-oxidants. They just trigger antioxidant systems within the body. Because I was growing microgreens at the time I read the book, and I was like, wait, what? So when he was just like, so ferritin is definitely a pro-oxidant. Like, it's only created when you break the cell while chewing it. It is a pesticide, essentially. You're eating a pesticide that's created by the plant. It just happens to tick your NRF2 and glutathione through the roof, which isn't necessarily a good thing. So I was like, oh, this is an interesting perspective. He was just like, curcumin, resveratrol, like, these are all pro-oxidants. Most people just don't get any activation of their immune system, which is why if you have AIP or if you have autoimmune, eliminating those often helps. But the question is, right, what is the damage being caused by? Because we should be able to tolerate almost anything. So it's right, an elimination and back to more stable, being able to tolerate everything. But that one poked a hole in my brain for a while, and then I tried carnivore and I was like, oh, this does work. Very interesting. But you definitely have to be fat adapted. Like, I would not go from high carb to that would be a nightmare.
Well, that's like people who jump into
just jump to
doing
keto
fasting.
like 3 days.
Yeah. Keto or intermittent fasting, and think, oh, this feels like rubbish. And it's like, well, you didn't put the baby steps in first.
Yeah.
You just went for a fairly advanced strategy off the bat.
Right.
For our ancestors, fasting, was just part of life.
Normal. Yeah.
And even if we just go back a couple of thousand years or even a couple of hundred years, fasting would have just been part of life. So if people jump into it without doing the background first, they're always going to run the risk of screwing themselves up.
Yeah.
And I think that's true for most of these diets. And I think I think what's really interesting is the argument of foods being hormetic stressors as well.
Yes, right.
That a lot of those leafy greens, part of the benefit there comes from the fact that we're having a stress response to them.
Any of the brassicas, anything in the mustard family. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And in some ways, when you allow the brassicas to go wild and they kind of revert to something more mustardy, because you can taste it. I mean, we allow our brassicas to always do a second year, sometimes a third year, and they seem to turn into each other. They kind of go back to some sort of purple sprouting broccoli at some point, and then they very quickly go to seed, and you kind of get the what is harvested as rapeseed, and I think in the States gets processed into canola. You get those big yellow flowers, or little yellow flowers, but lots of them. But as you start eating different parts of it, you can taste that mustard.
Oh yeah.
And with all things like chili and mustard and anything that's kind of got that fiery taste, you're going, this is going to have some sort of effect on my body.
Yep.
My body is going to have to fight in some way. I mean, people who have a hot curry, that because you start sweating. And that you've kind of got processes kicking off which are inflammatory. But the science seems to say that it's beneficial.
Right.
So I think, adding those hormetic stressors back in at some point in our diet, when we've got the ability to cope with them, is probably going to be a net benefit. There's going to be times where actually we just can't cope with those. And I think why, particularly the, things like FODMAP, so often is overlaid with stress. And if you add more hormetic stressors on a systemically stressed, it's not going to cope well.
Exactly. Yeah. And AIP does that, right? It's just remove as many stressors as possible to see what's stressing you and see where your baseline. Yeah, I agree 100%. And then his argument, which I enjoyed, was you don't need to do the hormetic stress via food. You can do it through cold plunges and heat shock and this, exercise. Like, exercise by itself, resistance training is the biggest hormetic stressor that most people will do willingly, and all of those things. But yeah, it's still but do they have additional benefit. Like there's plenty of things that are near toxic, like elderberry. Do not do elderberry in doses. One of those things, if you do too much, it is actually poisonous, but it has a pretty dramatic effect used at small doses acutely, where if you're getting sick or the arguments around food as a hormetic stressor are going to be very interesting moving forward. And it's going to lose a lot of people coming from standard American or just heavily processed diet. And they're going to get lost in the weeds of they can't eat anything, which I was lost in for a little bit. But if I ever have that happen,
elderberry is a fascinating one. So
yeah.
I started taking elderberry. I used to have really severe hay fever, and elderberry was the most helpful thing for my hay fever. And I mean, since going ancestral, primal, whatever you want to call it, my hay fever is pretty much zilch. But when it does kick off, elderberry is where I go back to. And I wonder if it's because it gives my histamine something to do.
Yep.
Because like they've got to fight something else rather than, oh, we're bored, let's fight that.
Yeah.
Instead, it's like, actually we've given a system something to fight, which ultimately is mildly poisonous.
Yeah.
That's the conclusion that I came to with elderberry, and I think from what you've just said there, that potentially checks out.
Okay, yeah, and all of these are so fascinating because everyone's experience is so individual. Like I knew someone that could only eat microgreens when I started farming. They just couldn't do anything really. They had such high autoimmune that they couldn't do really any fully developed food. But that didn't make any sense to me because microgreens have the highest antioxidant content, but there's almost no calories. It's just fiber, micronutrients, and antioxidants. I cannot wrap my head around that one, but she couldn't do every variety, but there was one very mild variety that she could tolerate. It was strange. People's food allergies is very strange to me. Yeah.
And I think that's why, when working with clients, it's like, here's a baseline of kind of human evolution and a direction to shoot for, but really we're building up your literacy of self-experimentation.
Right. Yeah. And that's what I love as the thing people come to is the permission to experiment. You don't have to go dig through 10 to 20 years of research. Because I see people, and I used to be like this, you would just need so much research before you're like, is this worth it? And you're like, you will never know. It takes, the science is always 10 years behind. Like I always tell people to personally experiment with something that's not just straight up dumb. But that was carnivore for a lot of people. They're just like, well, obviously this is just dumb. You're going to kill yourself. And people are like, nope. Turns out you don't need any glucose at all. That was what it showed. It was like, you actually don't need any. People are like, no, you do. And you're like, no, you don't. You can literally live off steak and eggs forever or for as long a time as would satisfy your experiment because your body's real good at making it. So anyways, it was just a good proof of concept in my brain where it was, oh, this is possible. That's what I like about the whole nutrition for as many dogmatic diet wars get in there. It's the whole, oh, this is possible. Like people keep breaking through mental barriers. And that's why I love paying attention to the research.
I think we love putting things in silos, don't we? But
yes, we do.
But we've not existed and evolved like that. We've moved through different terrain. If the out of Africa theory is right, and we all came from Ethiopia, there have only been certain things available there. And as we stumbled into new places, we would have developed resistance to certain things, which probably the people in Ethiopia wouldn't have been exposed to, and it would have killed them. But over time, we got used to them, and there'd be other things that we had to stay away from because perhaps our microbiome had, got the same stuff in the soil that the Ethiopians did. And we're a diverse species, and we can break through in new and interesting ways all the time. And I think we've just got to keep trialing that on ourselves.
And there's one more thing I wanted to talk to you about because I've been really thinking about doing this, and I saw a picture of you with a it might have been a certification or maybe like a pre-race plaque. Did you do MovNat?
Yeah. So the thing I think you saw was I just did my level 2 certification as a trainer. So I did my level 1 last year, and I was aiming to do level 1 and level 2 together, but I got COVID during level 1. So kind of finished level 1 with a fever. Which was not pretty. And then so I returned and did level 2 this year, and the idea is to do level 3 next year. as well as they do a combatives and an aquatics certification, which I'm keen to do. So for the people who don't know, MovNat is just shortened version of movement and natural, from the French movement naturel, so natural movement. And essentially it's just moving our bodies in the way that they have evolved to. So we're thinking, crawling, climbing, running, escaping, swimming, rolling, all of those different moves that our ancestors would have done during the average day of maybe stalking a deer or running away from a saber-toothed tiger. That's always the picture that comes to my mind. We always run away from saber-toothed tigers.
Yeah, it's the one that was told to us. It's the example everyone uses, and you're like, I wonder how many times this actually happened.
I think it's just the coolest image, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
But yeah, it's learning all of those skills and I guess rewiring them into daily life. And to my mind, it was such a good fit with ancestral living because it's play, it's fun, it's skill based. Workouts don't feel like a workout; they feel like good fun. But you're really working your mobility, which was the area that I really sucked in actually.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, and that's the bit that I've seen so much transformation in. Deep squats used to be killer for me. Now they're a comfortable position to be in. We floor sit most of the time, and transition from the ground to standing really well. We know the science around that if you're able to do that well when you're 50, you're twice as likely to be alive when you're 60. So just baking that in earlier on in life. And then just the fun skills like climbing and not just sticking to pull-ups, but finding the technique to do things akin to muscle-ups, but also swinging up using your legs, waking up your feet, really learning to use those in climbing techniques. That's been a lot of fun. Learning to crawl, the science around crawling is brilliant. That's something I do with all my workshops. When I do quite a lot in schools, working with teachers, and getting them crawling is really fun. Kind of breaking them out of their seriousness and getting them back to being a kid again, and just there's those patterns that we all use when we're a kid, when we're mucking about out on the streets or in the woods or whatever. Just getting adults doing those again, but seeing the value of them, and especially juxtaposed to being in a gym, and especially using things like weight machines with their constraining movements, and we're just working on a muscle belly at a time without really incorporating tendons and ligaments and using the springiness that is inherent there to move us really, really well.
Do you see a balance of any sort between resistance training, because muscle-centric movement does have so many metabolic benefits? Do you see any pairing of the two, or do you think that natural movement by itself is straining enough where you could probably just do that and be fine if you weren't concerned with hypertrophy or just sculpting yourself?
Yeah, I think actually the MovNat methodology is really good in terms of still honoring sort of building muscle. And even if you don't have a hypertrophy goal, you should do. the metabolic benefits of having a decent amount of muscle on you, especially as you age, is so well founded. And the kind of emphasis section of a workout can easily still be that. Often it's something like a deadlift. Right. You just might be adding some environmental complexity in there. So you might be doing an offset deadlift. You might be deadlifting a log rather than a barbell, and there'll be nothing against still using a barbell to work on the raw strength, but then reintroducing it into a natural context so that you can apply it in everyday life, and you can be strong to be useful, or be strong to be helpful. One of the things we did on level 2, which I absolutely loved, was a rescue from a burning building, mock-up scenario, obviously, and within that you've got a lot of you're lifting a dead weight human. And one of the guys I was partnered with was about 100 kilograms. So you've got to get them up on your shoulders and down across different terrain. We were doing it outside, so we weren't using stairs, but we were trying to find ways of honoring that. If we were in a burning building, how could you move them across the landscape that you might find inside a burning building? Which, if you've got fallen things, a log is a good thing to practice on, because that could be a girder that's fallen down or whatever. And in doing that, there's a big strength requirement, and if you haven't got a decent level of hypertrophy, there's no way you're going to do it.
Right.
So yeah, actually, I think if you train them within that methodology, you're still going to get those benefits, and you can totally spin it towards the area that you want. So for me, for a long time, I really did focus on the mobility more than your kind of standard workout, because I knew that was a deficit. But I've pretty much got rid of most of my big lifts in favor of natural movements that still put a heck load of strain, like doing a low to ground foot hand crawl. So you've got your chest like 2 inches off the floor and you're crawling. I mean, the activation that you're getting in your core, your chest, your leg is huge. You're getting that overload that you would be getting from a bench press, but in that diverse movement. And nothing against throwing bench presses in at all, or throwing a heavy object using a sort of chest pressing motion up from the floor. I just find it's a lot more fun. It's a lot more engaging, and I think there's probably, once you get people over that initial hurdle of, oh, this is something new, it's much more engaging for a population to continue doing it, because of that fun and skill acquisition element to it. And I think it feels intuitively good. Again, when you can do it outside, you can do it in a natural setting. There are more people there. It's got that play element to it. I just love it as a modality for using with clients, because they're much more likely to stick it than their gym routine.
That's true. That's probably a point that I often overlook, where I still have that. It's taken me so long to get rid of the bodybuilding mentality, because I used to be way skinnier than this, if you can imagine that. Like, I'm a $155, $160 wet, but I used to be like 120, which is a bad look for a 6'2.5" guy. But I still have the, but does this build muscle thing? Like, I still have that gym bro mentality, and it's obnoxious, just always kicking around back there. But as time goes on, it is really about longevity. Like, my hips get, even if I travel, my hips are just in screaming pain. So mobility is becoming such a massive factor in any sustainable movement practice. So that was primarily my interest, is if it can be used to satisfy that strength training sort of performance itch that a lot of us still have, but also build mobility. And I know there's forms of yoga that do that too, like power yoga was recommended to me, but I've never been a big yoga person, and I don't know if it's because it feels slightly forced, but I often like the more natural movement, because if I'm just outside, I don't need to set up for it. I really like things I don't need to set up for. I carry resistance bands in my truck all the time, and usually like a kettlebell. So if I'm homestead sitting for someone right now, so I just bring my resistance bands. I have like 3 sets of resistance bands. And if I have a banister to tie them around, between body weight movement, sprints, and resistance bands, like, I can get a pretty good workout. And again, it's not like sitting under active loading at a gym, so it's definitely not the same, but you can get an enormous amount of tension in with body weight and resistance bands paired together. So the MovNat has always called to me since my body has started screaming at me to focus more on mobility, like it sounds like it did yours as well.
Oh yeah, no, it's totally unlocked my mobility. And what's really interesting, just on the strength aspect, is I was traveling, and I was at a wedding in Arkansas last week, and the wedding rehearsal dinner was next door to a gym that was owned by the same people, and I had like an hour to kill. So me and 2 other guys from the UK popped next door into the gym, and they were like, "Yeah, we'll do some trap bar deadlifts." And I mean, there was like a full-on monkey bar rack, so I'm like up there playing around. But I jumped down and do sets with them, and these are big guys. And I was doing the trap bar deadlift, just matching them, weight for weight, rep for rep. Much smaller guy, but actually, and I've not deadlifted. So we've been like massive workout in the garden, and retrofitting all our windows and things, like I said earlier. So everything's chaos in terms of set up for lifting weights. I kind of look out the window now, and there's a plate over here, there's a bar over here. They've not been used clearly for a while. But I've just been doing MovNat still. And actually, I think I was probably stronger than I ever have been on a trap bar deadlift. There were, I don't know what it was, but there were a good number of plates on there, and I felt really good. doing that. And really my deadlift kind of hip hinge work has really been slam balls, logs, and stones.
Yeah.
And a lot of kind of powerful lifts. So kind of lifting and allowing the weight to travel, beyond my hands up to sort of chest height or something.
Yeah.
And doing that power work has really transferred into just kind of a static deadlift. So I totally think you can build strength with MovNat, totally build hypertrophy, and also work in those other benefits.
If you had to have 3 things for movement, for strength training, for the rest of your life, what would you pick?
Definitely a bar that I could hang from and get up onto. So having the headroom above it. So that's one thing we have out in the garden, is like one of the things when we move, without getting the full gym setup outside, because that's easy, a load of groundwork, just very quickly put a scaffold system up. So I had a bar. Even just hanging, for shoulder health, but then wanting to get that good pull motion. So definitely one of those. Something heavy that you can move in diverse ways. So probably something like a, 40, 50 kilogram slam ball that, you can throw around. You can get up onto your shoulder. You can walk around with, you can carry. And then probably a heavy barbell.
Yeah.
Because just going back to that core, if you can, you can do all your big compounds with that. And then, on top of that, I've already got my body. So
right. Yeah. Body weight by itself is usually enough, but sometimes it just feels good to lift heavy things, for sure. Body weight just can get boring, and you just want to feel that power. And it's hard to feel power just with body weight.
Yeah. I had some friends come around over the weekend, and one of the guys turned up and he said, "I just want you to break me." He's like really got into training recently. And I was like, "Oh, okay." I was trying to kind of pull him back from that mentality a little bit, but I said, "Okay, we'll do an intense workout." And we had some slam balls, and we were doing lots of throwing and catching. So that big explosive concentric action, and then the big eccentric of trying to catch a 20 kilogram slam ball, trying to slow that down as it comes towards you. That's hard work. You don't really notice the work. You're doing it in a group setting. That my wife and I and these 2 guys were doing it together. Throwing these balls around our lounge, and the next day they woke up and they're like, "Yep, broken."
Yeah, nervous system, and that's, I think, what people don't realize is it's not always like singular muscles that are going to feel, like you might not feel the soreness that you're used to in the gym. Might not feel the delayed onset muscle soreness, but your nervous system will feel very taxed. Oh, that's okay. This is my last question. What do you have? Almost everything I've been paying attention to recently is just nervous system focus. So for people who have chronic stress or just have unregulated nervous systems, what have you found, or what do you use personally to re-regulate your nervous system, either acutely, like if you need to get yourself down quickly, because like panic attack kind of stuff, just hyper unregulated, and bring yourself down quickly? And then what do you use on a more easy daily thing, or if you have any at all?
I'd say the answer to both of those is breath work. It's the easiest, quickest way to get on top of your nervous system. And the brilliant thing about it is you can train it when you don't need it, to the point that where you do need it, you can access it very easily. It's very easy once you've patterned it to slow your breath down, make it diaphragmatic, get a bit of constriction at the back of your throat, activate your vagus nerve. And conversely, it's very easy to quickly, do something like, breath of fire, or some quick forced exhales if you want to pump yourself up in a situation. And it's something that my high stress clients, they've found huge breakthroughs with, even to the point where they felt hindered in weight loss, and without actively changing anything else. And sure, that they will have changed things off the back of the change in their stress levels, but getting on top of their stress levels with their breath work, they found has unlocked things like their weight loss, or their sleep, or their digestion. And I'm pretty sure there's a longer tail and a cascade there. That's with that. But even just that stress regulation to their mind has been the breakthrough. So clients who have felt like they've been doing everything right, but haven't got their stress in check, done some good solid breath work for 4 weeks, and then they've gone, this is starting to see a change in my weight now, or my physique, however they're looking at that.
Yeah, I mean, I think stress is the monkey wrench and everything. I mean, even in the curriculum, whenever you're reading about hormones, and you're like, these are all brilliantly, they play off of each other so brilliantly, and then you just throw cortisol in there chronically, and it's like none of these work. Just disregard everything we just said. Yeah, stress just throws everything off. So modulating it and being able to have it used when it needs to be used is a massive life skill. Do you have any specific easy breath work that you do? I mean, maybe nothing that's takes a long time, but do you do like square breathing, box breathing? Like, what do you like?
Yeah, exactly those sort of tools. So things like triangle breathing and box breathing is just a good way of slowing the breath down. Essentially, if we want to bring ourselves into balance, we want to be breathing between 4 and 6 breaths a minute. So that can be in for 4, out for 4. Not necessarily seconds. It's probably 2 seconds for each of those, so that you're kind of bringing yourself down to that sort of 10 to 15 second range. And then if we're wanting to really get into deep relaxation, bringing it down to under 4 breaths per minute, which is where we might do 4-8 breathing, where box breathing really comes into its own, because it's a little easier if people are comfortable with retentions. I typically don't do retentions until people are comfortable with some of the more basics, like just getting their belly breath working, and being comfortable breathing through their nose. And then once they've got that down pat, then introducing the retentions, especially retentions on an exhale, because at that point it's like you've got more carbon dioxide coming into the lungs without kind of being diluted by oxygen. You're just it's really good because you're building up that carbon dioxide tolerance, which is the benefit of slowing the breath work down, because you're essentially allowing the Bohr effect to work better. The more carbon dioxide in your system, the more the oxygen's released into the cells. Sounds counterintuitive. A lot of people think they're playing with oxygen when they're doing breath work. They're not. They're playing with carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
But when people understand that, they go, okay. You give them that framework, and then they're good to start doing the retentions. But 4-4 breathing to bring themselves into balance, 4-8 breathing to bring them into deep relaxation, and then just the forced exhales to help hype yourself up. That's one we use every morning as a family. So in our morning routine, we do breath of fire, which just forced exhales, sort of 20 rounds of very quick breath, to kind of get us ready to start the day, which gives us just an extra little boost of cortisol, but nothing crazy.
Right. Yeah. No, it is very intense, and it's in large groups. When you feel everyone around you doing that is way more intense. Like I go to a men's breathwork thing, and the amount of energy, like you can literally just feel it pulsing. It's kind of scary at some point. If you get like 15 people in synchrony doing breath of fire, weird things start happening. That's a lot of energy.
Yeah. I mean, then you could start going in, down the rabbit hole of quantum consciousness and all that sort of thing.
We do. Don't worry.
Nothing's
off limits. Yeah.
That's totally the sort of world that I can see you inhabiting, because like we identified when we were training, it was like, Alex is just me, but on the other side of the pond.
Yep, just different manifestations of different versions of yourself. Yeah, it's super. That doesn't make sense whenever you hear that in like a more spiritual, or if you're focusing on awarenessness or consciousness, whenever you hear that everyone is just a different version of you, people are like, what does that mean? And then you see someone that's literally just a slightly varied version of you. You're like, that could have been me in another life. That's what that is. Yeah. Yeah. And then you just have to take that to the logical extreme. Yeah. But I do have one more question, because our curriculum didn't, and I'm kind of surprised now that I've fallen down the vortex of water. There's almost nothing about hydration in our curriculum, or in any curriculum. I'm curious what sports performance science said about hydration, and if you use it at all in your practices, like as a specific focus of like hydration, like nutrition.
Yeah. So nowhere near to the extent that you do. It's something I've been listening to the stuff that you put out, just because it's something that is kind of interested me and
Mm-hmm.
something that I'd like to kind of go down that rabbit hole at some point. Really, from the sports science backdrop, it was always very much isotonic in terms of salt and also in terms of
Yep.
glucose. So, taking things like Gatorade and Lucozade, that was what was recommended from the conventional wisdom. For me, and what I do with my clients is really just the salts.
Yep.
So making sure they're getting their sodium, potassium, and magnesium along with their water, so that they're better able to hydrate. I'd love to really understand some more around sort of the hydrogen interaction within water, some of
Mm-hmm.
the ionization. I mean, for us as a family, we'd love to start collecting our own rainwater and processing it. It's a little jump from where we're at right now. So our water storage should hopefully come onto line probably in the autumn once we've got just a bit more external work done.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, we can start figuring out exactly what we do with it, aside from use in the garden, which is,
Yeah.
the thing, and how we retrofit other systems into that. So at that point, I'd love to really, or by that point, to have gone down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's a long one. I didn't think it was going to take as long to get down as it has, because it's an old science that
Mm.
has a lot of literature, but a lot of the literature is very confused because there's not a lot of great foundation, and there's a lot of mysticism behind water. Like,
Uh-huh.
people are still arguing that there's only three phases.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. Like, there's clearly a fourth phase. I mean, it's called structured water. Someone almost won a Nobel Prize for it. Like, but that's not super well known. Like, people will still be like, that's conspiracy. And you're like, you can see it under like, you can make it. It's called easy exclusion zone water. I mean, water is a battery, but that's the point. Is it's so new in the literature, but there's a lot of data coming out now about structured water. People are paying attention to their water a little more because there's an industrial explosion over in the States every week now. So there's a river system being contaminated, like the massive chemical companies like DuPont and all of them, that have been dumping their waste in the water. It is now actually known. So people are paying a little more attention to filtration first, which is the key, right? You need clean mineral water first. And then people get sucked into the world of hydrogen, and then you can tumble down structure and all of the spiritual things that come with it, because we don't know what water is. It's so weird. Like, it's not just H2O, right? I was actually having an argument the other day with people about the water cycle, and they're like, water is forever. And I was like, no, I can split it on my countertop. That's what electrolysis is. You're literally splitting water apart. It's not that hard. And this happens in nature. And people were like, wait, what? I thought there were only three phases. And they're like, no, but I get what you're coming from. And it's so much more. Like, the disassociation and reassociation of water is such a mind-blowing subject, and hydrogen by itself. If you want to go real down the rabbit hole, Alpha Vedic has a great podcast on this with I think it was George, I'm gonna forget his name. It's the inventor of the Aquacure. So I forgot his last name. It's not Foreman. I usually know this. Anyway, he talked about hydrogen being an octave, and the hosts are very good. Dr. Bear, Paul Lando, hydrogen or elements on the periodic table as we think of them being octaves. So this brings you into the like resonance way of thinking, where it's not just a billiard ball and atom. Like, hydrogen has different forms depending on like its atmospheric conditions. That was one of the more esoteric ways of thinking about it. And if you dive into the water world, that's what it feels like. It doesn't feel like you're playing with molecules. It feels like you're playing with like base transformational structures. It's super weird, and the science is now starting to catch up. So there'll be a lot of it coming online in the next 10 years, and I'm fascinated by
Yeah, and I
research.
think
We weren't taught this, that you could just do so much with water. It's such an
yeah.
easy thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. So when I was doing my degree, the theology side of it is actually where I came across some
Oh,
interesting
really?
research on water, because of ordered water in the microtubules of the
Yeah.
brain, kind of essentially, having different quantum properties, and
Yeah.
therefore allowing potential non-mechanical top-down causation from humans in the world around us. And when you think about observing a photon sent down one end of a photoelectric cable and it changing the spin on the other photon sent the other way, you're like, this makes sense when we start thinking about water there. And again, that was something that I parked sort of back in my brain. And then when I started seeing the things around all the water, I'm like, this is something I've seen before. Only in kind of relation to neuroscience and spirituality and mysticism. So yeah, I kind of get where you're coming from there on, having a mystical backdrop, and now we're starting to see some science come out around it. And I think that's always exciting when science starts catching up with something that humans have had some intuition on for a good amount of time.
Yeah, there's all these healing waters around the world, and the thing I usually land on, because people can actually look it up, is there were at least 7. I think some of them are closed down now, or were during COVID, but there were at least 7 sites sprinkled around the world. Like Saudi Arabia had one, Nordenau, Germany had one, Lourdes, France is the most popular and well-known one, where people would just go on pilgrimages and claim to be healed, or they'd have random chronic diseases just disappear. So, some scientists were like, okay, what's in the water? And there were always holy sites built on top of these, right? And the one common thing they found, and I'm sure this is a multivariate thing, but the one thing that they all agreed on was there were stupid high levels of molecular hydrogen, which is H2, so loose formed hydrogen gas in the water. And we can measure that. And I have like meters that measure that. But so that's the new craze over the past it's been around forever. I mean, the machine I use, the company's been around 50 years, but a lot of ionizers popping up because people are figuring out, especially in the sports world, that's where most of the money is being dumped in, is molecular hydrogen as like a recovery agent, because it's the smallest molecule we know of, and it's a gas. There's no digestion or assimilation, no metabolism necessary. It ticks your antioxidant systems, and it's also directly combative to free radicals. So it's kind of the easiest thing you can do instead of having to think about where else your antioxidants are coming from, resveratrol or curcumin or all of the other ones you only get a couple times, right, when you're eating. Yeah, you drink water all day. So it's kind of just like supercharging your recovery all day. And I'm very interested to see what happens whenever the sports world starts doing real tracking. It's already exists, but there's maybe 300 total studies on it, and a lot of them are not as scientifically rigorous as we would want. They're there on neuroprotectiveness, DNA repair and protectiveness, pH, blood balancing. It's sprinkled all over the place, but I'm waiting for like large studies to be done on this for like thousands of people. Right now, they're probably on like maybe 100 or so, just because studies are expensive to fund. But yeah, it's a fascinating area of research.
Yeah, and it's totally something I'd love to get you on at some point and chat to my community about is hydration, because it's something that you've gone down the rabbit hole on, and you know a heck load more than me. So at some point, we'll get you on there.
That'd be
to
awesome.
talk to them about kind of optimal strategies for hydrating.
And it's very interesting as well when you're playing with low carb, which wasn't talked about at all. Like, you're just blowing through water a little more. If you're depleting glycogen, you're just flushing a lot of water and electrolytes. So yeah, it's kind of critical in that specific world when you're not just pounding carbs all the time. You're just going through a lot of water. In closing, before I find another tangent, because I could talk to you about everything all day, where can people find you? And give us anything that we didn't touch on that you feel is critical importance, and give like the biggest thing that you think people can do to make largest changes for all day energy. The one big thing.
Yeah. So they can find me at WholeLifeHealth.UK. I'm on Instagram at Coach Jake Mahal. And between those two things, you can spiral out into the places I am as well. I think the one thing we didn't touch on, which is a huge one, is just really guarding and valuing our relationships. As humans, the thing that stresses us out more than anything and causes more disruption than anything is our inability to relate well to one another when things go awry. Being able to say, I'm sorry, I got that wrong, you were right. the ability to build bridges, and to believe that there's enough in the world for both you and for me, to have an abundance mindset, not need to grab onto things. I think that just causes all sorts of craziness on a personal, individual level, right up to national scale. And if we can view that there is enough out there and we can share the resources, we can share our wealth, we can be generous, and we build that positive upwards cycle of generosity, and we don't all stress each other out in the same way. And, we benefit at a core human level as well as a societal level.
Wow. Yeah. Perfect. Perfectly said. I don't know how we missed that, but I'm glad you brought that up. And yeah, that is huge. That's kind of the core fabric of civilization, I would say, actually. Yeah. Just relationships and of mental health for sure. Thank you so much for your time today.
It's a pleasure. It's really good to speak with you. It's good to reconnect, and we should do this more.
Yeah, man. I like it. Thank you.